Hello again. Today I'm going to be talking about things which are really important to consider when you're deciding on which SSP program is right for your school. And that includes your own program. So please bear in mind you do not need to use a validated program. So these are things that may be useful for you to think about. I've been a little bit concerned reading posts online where some schools seem to be concerned about one particular tiny aspect of a program, and that's what they're searching for. And I think there are actually a huge number of things that you want to think about and look carefully at before making any decisions about how you want to move forwards with your phonics teaching. You know the children in your school better than anyone else. You know what motivates them, what engages them, how they learn best, what learning needs your children have, and what works best for one school may not work best for another. So I've written a whole list of things to think about, so I will keep referring to those so I don't miss anything out. So the first set of things are to do with how the programme is actually taught. So think about what maybe works best for you. Are you looking for a programme that works with the whole class? With maybe keep-up sessions running alongside? Are you looking for a programme which works with grouping the children by phonics needs? Or are you looking for a programme that can be used flexibly? So it may be suitable for either whole class teaching or groups, depending on what works best for you. Next thing to think about, some things to do with the order or overview of the programme. So if you're looking at a validated one potentially, or you're thinking about creating your own, it's looking at the overview, the long-term plan. So the expectations of the programme, do they line up with what you know works best for your children? So different programmes introduce graphemes at different paces. So for example, there may be a programme which chooses to teach a new grapheme over 2 days instead of a new one every day. So the pace and expectation of how quickly children move through the programme is definitely something to think about. Look at the medium-term plan for the programme and look carefully and in detail at the content. So I have read posts online where people are querying the inclusion of specific graphemes within a programme and how useful those actually are. So take a look, see which graphemes are being included. Are they going to be useful for your children, or are they literally in a couple of words and not terribly useful words? What are your views, for example, on URE? So some of the new programs out have kept that in, others have removed it, so you may have views on that. Do you have a view on whether you would wish to teach words ending with an N and a K as two separate sounds, so sync as s, I, n, k, or would you prefer to teach it as a chunk of sound, as some programs are doing, s, I, n, k? So if you've got particular views on that, the programs are pretty much split over that one, so that might be something that you want to have a little think about. When a program teaches alternative pronunciations for graphemes, see if you can find out how that is done. So are children told that, for example, the letter A is making an O in these words, so it will make it in all the words that are shown today, or are they being shown how to work out what sound a grapheme is making when they come to an unknown word, and they're unsure what sound it might make? Are they being given strategies on how to work that out? Does the programme include investigations of best bets for spelling? So once we know a variety of graphemes for a particular sound, does the programme look at which one is most likely to be used and where for spelling? Does it provide spelling aids which have those best bets or rules written down for children to actually look at? So those are some things to think about. Next section is lesson content. So I would have a look at the structure of a weekly plan. and decide if it would suit your children. So is the amount of new learning across a week at a suitable pace for your children? Is there a little bit and the right amount of new learning in each lesson? Does the lesson incorporate revision? So some programs have, for example, a Friday lesson that is revision of what has taken place earlier in the week. So would that suit your learners? Where are the lessons supposed to take place? So are the children sitting on the carpet, or are they expected to sit at tables? Or is it a mixture of the two? Because you may have strong views either way on that. Do the lessons require an interactive whiteboard for all or part of the sessions? If so, is that something that you're able to accommodate? So I know sometimes where schools prefer to group children for phonics, not all of those groups necessarily have access to an interactive whiteboard during the session, so that might influence your decision. Does the programme provide a good balance of reading and writing across a week? So have a look at an example of a weekly plan. Is there a good balance of reading and writing? And in every part of the programme for every year group as well. Do you have a particular view on the use of workbooks? So some of the programmes provide workbooks and you have to use them. In some of the programmes they're provided, but it's optional. Think also about the cost of having to continually buy into workbooks if that is an inherent part of a programme. Do workbooks sit within the learning ethos of the school in terms of early years? So that might colour your decisions. Do lessons require a lot of time to prepare resources? So some programmes have a lot of flashcards that have to be organised, and that can take up time in terms of preparing for lessons. Are word meanings within lessons supported by pictures? And that's particularly important for EAL learners. So that might be something that you want to investigate. Are the lessons interactive enough for your children? So if you have very active learners, are they catered for? Or are the lessons structured where there is a lot of sitting still? You've got to work out what's best for your children. Are they activities that are on that lesson plan going to engage your learners? Is it important for you that reading activities in a phonics lesson require the children to read for a purpose? So they're not just reading a flashcard, but potentially they're reading a word which might tell them what exercise to do in Georgie's gym, for example, and then they've got to get up and move. So they're responding to the meaning of the words they're reading as well. Is that important to you, or does that not matter? Is it important for you that some of the writing activities within a phonics lesson provide a purpose and context for writing? Or is that not a priority for you? Is there enough revision throughout the lesson? I'm a huge fan of that. Some lessons do all the revision at the beginning of a session, and then the rest of the session is all focused on the one new thing. So you might want to have a look and think, is that enough revision? Another thing to bear in mind, is there enough revision of the writing of tricky words within phonics sessions? So when the children are being asked to write words, is there a mixture of old tricky words for writing coming in there? If they're being asked to write a sentence or a caption, are the tricky words that have been taught recently for writing incorporated in those as well? Because sometimes there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of opportunities to revise those spellings. Do you have a preference for whether children use whiteboards to write in phonics sessions, or whether they are expected to go to tables to do that writing? Because again, that might govern the decisions that you make. So the next set of things to think about are grapheme mnemonics. Now, mnemonics for graphemes can be incredibly effective if you have the right grapheme, but you need right mnemonic, sorry. But you need to think about what you are hoping to achieve from a grapheme mnemonic. So ideally, what they do is enable a child who is looking at a grapheme and having a bit of a blank moment to be able to work out what sound that grapheme actually makes. or if they're trying to write it and they've got the sound in their head, that the mnemonic will enable them to potentially get to the grapheme they need to write it down. So that's the whole point of a mnemonic. So I read a lot about people online asking for mnemonics that have actions. And I understand that we do want phonics to be active, but why are you wanting an action for your mnemonic? So if you're going to cue children in with an action, so you show them the grapheme and then you start to do the action, you're kind of giving them the answer. So what you need your mnemonic to do is, if they're staring at the grapheme, the mnemonic, are they going to be able to get that action themselves at that moment in time, and is it going to be able to get them to read that grapheme? And if it is, then that's fine. But if it's an action for the sake of an action, you've got to question whether it's doing the job that you want it to do. So mnemonics for graphemes are particularly effective when they are the same shape as the letter. So if a child is looking at a letter and that shape reminds them of a picture that contains or starts with the sound in question, that can be an effective way for them to remember what sound that is making. Also think about digraphs. So some programs have mnemonics for the single letters, but what do the mnemonics look like for digraphs? Some programs don't continue them on to the digraph stage, some do, but some change their format at that point. So whereas they might have single letters which are the same shape as the mnemonic, as the image that it triggers, that sometimes changes as soon as it gets to digraphs to just being an image of something that contains the sound, but it doesn't relate to the shape of the letters within that digraph. So you've got to think, are the digraphs that are being offered, mnemonics for digraphs, going to do the job that you need them to do? Some mnemonics also teach the handwriting formation. So that's something that you know, is that important to you or not, or do you have another way of tackling the handwriting aspect? Next thing to think about is tricky word mnemonics. So does the program provide mnemonics, those are memory aids, to help the children to spell the tricky words or the common exception words? Because children often find those difficult to spell. And if there are mnemonics provided, I'm a firm believer that they need to contain the word you're trying to spell, because what you're trying to do is, at the point a child is trying to spell one of those common exception words and they're having a blank moment, that the thought of that word itself triggers the mnemonic. Now, if the mnemonic itself doesn't actually contain the word you're trying to spell, I don't think the trigger is necessarily likely to be there. So that's worth having a look at as well. Other resources. So what other resources are provided by a program? Does it provide everything that you would consider you would need or would be important to you? So for example, does it provide writing mats? Not all of the programs do. They would need to be differentiated and potentially be different for different stages within the program to meet the needs of the children at different stages in their phonics development. Have they got wall posters that I think it's really important that once children are in year one and they are seeing different graphemes for a sound, that there is a way in which those different graphemes are grouped together in terms of displays. And if the program is covering best bets, is there a way that those best bets, as in which of the grapheme options for a sound should we be using and when, that might be important to you. Next set of things to consider are decodable texts. So before buying into anything, I really wouldn't buy any decodable books without looking inside them first. Most of the programs are quite good about giving you access to look, but make sure you get a chance to look inside the books, because you've got to be sure if those are the reading materials you're using with your reception in year one children, and that's their first experience of reading, that those texts are going to engage your learners and give them a joy in reading. That's really, really important. So look at the subject matter that those readers are covering, and also look at the illustrations. Are the illustrations going to inspire and engage your children? Does the program provide sufficient texts at each stage of the program and at a suitable level of difficulty. So I've read a great deal about people online talking about how do we do book bands versus phonics stages within a program. So yes, absolutely, the books need to match the stage that you're at within your phonics program. But there is a huge difference between texts that may be at a similar phase, for example. So if I take an example just of phase 2, if you were using that kind of type of program, there may be some very simple texts that match phase 2 that literally have just one word on the page, and the child has to sound it out and turn over the page and see if they worked out the word correctly. They get the surprise on the other side. So that would be literally one word on a page. There may be a couple of words on a page that are repeated. So it might have the and then one word for them to sound. And then we've got the and one word for them to sound. But there is still a story that runs alongside that. So that's still phase 2, but very simple. That would be the equivalent of an early pink banded book. You might have a phase 2 book that has a whole sentence where there is certain elements of repetition within that sentence structure across the text. So that may be more of a pink B banded level for phase 2. You might have a phase 2 book that has got a sentence of maybe sort of 5 or 6 words, and on the next page there is a completely different sentence structure with 5 or 6 words on the page. That might be more of a red-yellow level in terms of book bands. So it's not necessarily enough to just say, I've got phase 2 books or I've got phase 3 books. Have you got a range of level of difficulty within those texts? Because you've got to be able to challenge your more able readers within a phase, but also to support your lowest 20%. And I think one of the places where perhaps there's not so much support is for your lowest 20% at the earliest levels. So really consider whether the program is able to give you enough decodable texts to support those earlier readers. Does the program provide a variety of text types? So is there non-fiction? Is there fiction? Is there poetry? At each of those stages, because we want to be giving children a wide variety of texts. I'm quite concerned actually at the seeming lack of texts containing contents pages and indexes, because those are quite important for children to start to get their heads around, certainly in year 1. Right, next thing to think about is reading sessions. So do you want to have complete freedom in how you choose to teach children to read and how you organise reading sessions with whole classes of children, with groups of children? Do you want that flexibility to do that in a way which works best for your children? Some programmes will enable you to do that. Certainly if you create your own, you will have that flexibility. Or are you happy to be told how you do reading, how many times a week, what you've got to do in each session? So you've got to decide what is important to you. If you are happy to be told how to do your reading and how many times it happens, you've got to be sure that you've got the staffing to facilitate that being able to happen. So then some points on assessment. So really drill down and have a little look at what assessment will look like. Does it look manageable? How often does it have to be completed? And will this fit with other assessment systems within your school? Does it cover everything that you need to know to inform your teaching? I mean, really, we should only be assessing children's phonic knowledge and skills in order to inform our teaching moving forwards. And actually, that's another thing to consider, actually going back to lesson structures. Is there flexibility within the programme for you to change what is on a lesson plan in order to specifically address any needs that have been flagged up within assessments? So that's something also to think about. So does it cover everything? So I'm aware that some assessment systems don't cover things like the spelling of tricky words. Well, if you don't know which tricky words they can and can't spell, you don't know which ones you need to focus on moving forwards within your phonics teaching. Does it cover knowing the names of the letters, which is something they do need to know? Does the assessment system provide you with the information that you need to identify children who are in need of interventions. I mean, you've probably got a good idea of who those children are, but specifically what it is they need to focus on in those interventions. So is it going to enable you to drive the content of that? Does the assessment system provide you with other aspects of data which you might find useful? So, for example, progress of different pupil groups. That may or may not be important to you, but it's something, if it is, that may be something to consider. Next set of points are to do with interventions. So does the programme provide interventions for children who are already behind or who are at risk of falling behind? Are these group interventions? Are they one-to-one interventions? Or are they a mixture of the two? Are those interventions going to be manageable for your school? So, for example, if an intervention is required as a keep-up on the afternoon following a morning phonics session, and that's going to require them to have that keep-up session on the same day in the afternoon, if you do not have TA support in the afternoon, you're not going to be able to do that. So your staffing levels may determine which the interventions have got to work in your school with the staffing you've got available to do them. Do the interventions require specific resources? And if they do, will there be access to those resources at the time and in the place where they're needed? So the one that immediately springs to mind is use of interactive whiteboards. So if the intervention requires the use of an interactive whiteboard, but you don't have one of those in the room where your groups may be doing interventions, then that's not going to work for your school. Next set of things to think about, training. So does it matter to you whether the training is in person, whether it's live online, or whether it's pre-recorded online? Because different programs offer different things in the way of training. Does the program offer support for phonics or literacy subject leaders who might be overseeing the implementation? So think about what you would want from training. Different programs are offering different training packages. So what would be the things that would be really important to you in terms of that offer? And then look and ask about those things. And the final set of things to talk about is cost. So is the cost of the planning and resources a one-off fee, and then it's yours to use forever after, however you see fit? Excuse me. Or are you going to be tied into a subscription each year in order to enable you to access the planning and the resources each year? So that may determine your thoughts. Also, training costs. So obviously the first year, if you're starting something new, there will be a training cost implication for training your staff. Now, after that, how does the training costs work out moving forwards? So have you got to pay into an annual subscription in order to access training? Now, that may be a cost-effective solution if you've got a very transient staff. So if you've got high turnover of staff in your school, that may be a cost-effective solution to look at. If you have a relatively stable school staff, after your initial training, it may be that you don't want to pay into a subscription for training that actually you don't really need, and you'd rather have a model which was a kind of a pay-as-you-go for the staff who need it. So that's something to think about. So hopefully I've just drawn your attention to the wide variety of considerations, and really think carefully. You do not have to have a validated programme if all your children are doing well with what you're currently doing, and if you've got matching books. Now, you may have identified aspects of your provision that you feel you want to tighten up, and it may be that you look towards programs to address the gaps in the provision within your own program with a specific, for example, you may have your own program and the one bit that you're missing is a set of mnemonics, and that's what you're going to go out there and look for in order to complete a program that actually has worked very well for you. But I'm really concerned that people are spending lots of money and making decisions, and then sometimes those decisions, they're encountering things that they maybe don't like after they've spent the money. So I think really, if you're determined that you want a validated program, and you're determined that's the route to take, I really would wait until the process is finished. And I've been saying this since last April, because you don't know what's going to come out. And there are going to be things that are important to you. So take this time to consider some of the things I've talked about today. Which are the absolute non-negotiables for your school in terms of what you absolutely have to have for your learners to be successful? And then use this time to start looking at what's out there, eliminating the ones that don't match some of those key criteria for you. But don't base that decision on just one thing, because you've got to look at the programs as wholes. And it may be that you've got to compromise in one area to get something else that's really important for you. So, please feel free to share this video with anyone who you think is currently in the middle of those sort of decision-making processes. And hopefully I've identified some things useful to think about.